Good evening. Welcome to 307 Sidewalk Labs Experimental Workspace. It is an absolute pleasure to have you all welcomed into our space this evening. My name is Logan McDonald. I work on the accessibility team for Sidewalk Labs. I am going to start off by doing a land acknowledgement. My apologies, 1 second. Here we go. Sidewalk Toronto recognizes that this land we now call Toronto has been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years. It is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, and most recently, the Mississaugas of New Credit First Nation. The land is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which asks us to care for and share peaceably in the resources around the Great Lakes. We are mindful of a history of broken treaties and of the urgent need to work continuously towards reconciliation. And we are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land. So I would just like to say thank you very much again for coming out tonight. And I am going to bring to the stage the accessibility lead for Sidewalk Labs Toronto, Samara Trilling. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Logan. Great, and I'm going to welcome our presenters to the stage. So while everyone is getting set up, just wanted to say hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Samara Trilling, and I am a software engineer at Sidewalk Labs, and also our accessibility lead.
Yeah, maybe this way a little bit.
I want to welcome you to this public talk on behalf of the entire Sidewalk Labs and Waterfront Toronto team. Over the past 3 months, we've engaged with members of the accessibility community in Toronto to draft accessibility principles and commitments that will inform our planning work. We've partnered with the Inclusive Design Research Centre of the Ontario College of Art and Design to host co-design sessions with the Toronto accessibility community to design accessible ideas and systems, like tactile pavement that lets you know when you're too close to the street, and accessible autonomous vehicles that could take you to an urgent care center when you're not feeling well. The ideas from these 3 co-design sessions fed directly into the accessibility hackathon that we hosted last week right here on the dynamic street, where engineers and designers from Sidewalk Labs and the broader Toronto tech community came together with inclusive designers and Torontonians with lived experience of disability to create working software and hardware models of these ideas from the co-design sessions. Summaries of the co-design sessions and the hackathon project descriptions can be found online at cities.inclusivedesign.ca. And finally, last Saturday, at our open sidewalk for the accessible city, we opened our doors to the public and hosted full-scale demos from 4 Canadian accessible technology companies: Tekla, Access Now, Key to Access, and Hyperlight Systems. And you'll have the pleasure of hearing from the CEO of Access Now, Mayan Ziv, just in a little bit. We also hosted an art installation and talks with artists from Tangled Art Plus Disability, plus a fabulous keynote by Eliza Chandler, Professor of Disability Studies at Ryerson University. We are committed to continuing this engagement with the accessibility community throughout the planning process, during testing, and after implementation. And we hope that you'll participate tonight. We have copies of our draft accessibility principles on the library table in the exploration space to the left of the stage from your perspective in the audience. We hope you'll take a moment to read our principles, mark them up, write all over them, add things, change things, give us feedback, and make your voice heard. We will continue to learn and update our principles and commitments to reflect our best collaborative vision for a radically accessible and inclusive neighborhood here in Toronto. For those of you who may not know, Sidewalk Toronto is a joint effort with Waterfront Toronto and the local community to co-create a new type of neighborhood on Toronto's waterfront. We see this project as a unique opportunity to address some of the biggest challenges facing cities, such as climate change, transportation, and tonight's topic, accessibility. I want to emphasize up front that these public talks will not focus specifically on the Sidewalk Toronto plans. We have many other opportunities coming up in the upcoming months for people to provide direct feedback and help refine that work, including a public roundtable in November, which we hope that you will all attend. You can find that calendar of events on our website, which is shown on your program card. We see these public talks as a great chance to gather some of the leading expert voices who are not affiliated with the project, but who are tackling the same challenges we are exploring with Sidewalk Toronto. We don't have all of the answers, and we love learning about new ideas the same way that you all do. Tonight, we're focusing on one of the most exciting challenges facing Toronto and all global cities, which is how to make cities more accessible for everyone. We're excited to have this great group of panelists share some leading examples of innovative initiatives from around the world and to discuss how a city like Toronto can adopt and adapt these ideas to help its own residents create a more accessible city. This is a really important public conversation. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And with that, I will turn things over to tonight's moderator, Jane Farrow.
Thank you, Samara. Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. So, do you know Mayan Ziv, all the way from what neighborhood? What neighborhood are you in? Spadina. Okay, fantastic. And we have Darren Bates, who's come to us from Austin. What's the slogan of Austin? What's the, like Toronto, we're supposed to be diversity as our strength. What do they say in Austin? Say it again? Keep it weird, yes. The most fantastic civic slogan, I think, out there. It's awesome. They're proud of being different in Austin, so it's great to have you here, Darren. Thanks for coming. And, of course, local legend Luke Anderson. You may be familiar with him, StopGap, but we'll get into a more elaborate introduction before they do their remarks. I'm here to do just a little bit of housekeeping up front. There are some lines on the floor that you might have noticed, and in a very clever bit of intuitive and obvious design, the yellow lines will take you to the washrooms. If you want to follow them, there's a set over there, and there's a universal bathroom at the back as well, which is fully accessible and gender neutral, so that's there. There's water. If you get thirsty, go help yourself. And there are some accessibility services tonight that I just want to explain. As you can see, there are ASL interpreters signing up here in front. They'll be taking turns. There's a team of 3 of the mighty interpreters here. We also have captioning on the TV screen. And we also have what's called live audio description, which is a less familiar type of accessibility aid, but it's generally the describer is over here, Kat, and she is offering a service where things are described for people that may be traditionally used by people who are limited in their vision. They may have a vision impairment and may not see the extra things going on. So people have heard of this often in context of movies or theater when the action needs to be described. So actor is creeping towards the cave. and so on. So it makes entertainment much more accessible. But of course, rolling out these services to a broader range of services is the goal. So those are services being provided tonight. And if you need any of those services, you probably were asked at the front when you came in if you needed them, but headsets are available for the audio describer. I mean, hey, if there's extra ones, you might just want to try it out. So you can raise your hand, we'll make sure you have a headset. And so I think that's all we need in that end. Hopefully everyone's comfortable with the room temperature with the big ass fan. If we get hot, we can circulate some more air. And so tonight is a presentation, some thoughts, engaging with a very important topic, but it's also a conversation. And there's an opportunity for you to give brief comments and questions. But first we're going to hear remarks. Maybe people will take 5-10 minutes, each presenter, so we'll have about half an hour of that with some slides. And then we'll have a moderated discussion while we go back and forth as a group. But, you know, we're really sort of, to my mind, what's really important is to engage you. I mean, just a quick show of hands. Who has some thoughts about the topic of accessibility? Oh, just a few. There you go. Maybe some comments. Maybe some questions. So that would be me actually trying to do my job, getting my job better, if we really hear from you as well. So we'll try to share the mic and make it participatory and fun. It's a good principle, and shed some light and heat about a very important topic that you obviously care a lot about because you're here. So I think that takes care of housekeeping. Any questions about the format? All right. So I guess we'll get started. We're going to start with Luke. All right. Let me just move. Let's get
Yeah,
closer.
let's cozy up a little
Let's
bit
get
here.
cozy a little bit over here. Hang on to your mic there. Let's just furniture arrange a bit. Come on over a little bit, Darren. Let's pretend we're more of a TV studio here. Everyone's getting cozy. All right. So Darren, do you want to take it away? I'll give you a little introduction. Of course, Darren is the founder of StopGap, which helps communities find and build the benefits of barrier-free spaces. What?
Luke.
Luke, just Luke.
You said Darren.
Oh,
You can give me those
already
qualities.
okay.
I mean,
I've got
you
it. I've got it out of the way. I look dumb. Like I made a mistake. So now it's
all
open
right.
season for you guys. All right, Luke. And so I don't know Luke. All right. Founder of StopGap, which helps communities find and build the benefits of barrier-free spaces. I think maybe I should just let you describe what that is. I have a bit more description, but I bet you're going to talk about it.
I've got some things to say about it.
Not your first rodeo, right? Okay. So StopGap is an amazing force of change out there, making spaces barrier-free with really simple, beautiful infrastructure. If I do say myself, I like plywood. I'm a fan. And Luke is also the recipient of the 2016 Jane Jacobs Award, which is given to people who are great city builders and are making a huge difference. So, you know what, Luke? Just take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, namesake, hey? Jane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you need it tilted at all,
Amazing.
volume up.
So I'm going to be describing the photographs for those that would appreciate verbal description. This is a photograph of me at my old place of work on Duncan Street. So just quickly, I had a spinal cord injury almost 16 years ago. I was all of a sudden introduced to a world that's really not well suited for someone that uses a wheelchair. So I worked out of this building at 19 Duncan here in Toronto for 8 years. And in the photograph, it shows a big, heavy, folding aluminum ramp that needed to be deployed at least twice a day. So every time I wanted to get in and out of the building, I had to rely on someone to help set up this heavy folding ramp. Now, the job was amazing, but this issue was so frustrating to me. Just imagine what that would do to your independence and your spontaneity to come and go as you please, at least twice a day, to a place where you frequent often, like your place of work or your home, somewhere where you frequent often during the day. Well, yeah, I had to deal with this for 8 years. And as you can imagine, my frustration boiled over. But you know what? A really interesting thing was happening when this ramp was left out. Everybody loved using it. Parents pushing strollers, delivery people, the elderly, people with temporary disabilities due to an injury or an illness, and by affiliation, anybody else joining somebody from one of those groups was automatically affected by that stepped entryway. And I wanted to get a conversation started about this issue. I wanted to get people thinking about really smart ideas that could help overcome situations like this and many others. I wanted to highlight our human right to equal access. And so this was around 2011 when my frustration was reaching a tipping point. And we can flip the slide. I'm gonna just go back to that last slide real quick. This bike, which many of you here, if you're from Toronto, you've been living here since 2011, you might remember this, and it really inspired us to think about how when you paint a simple object a really bright color, the world listens. So we thought, well, you can flip the slide. Why don't we build some really brightly painted ramps, and we'll come up with a really catchy name that's suggestive of the ramps not being a permanent solution, but a stopgap measure to the single-stepped issue. We'll paint them really bright colors. We'll get people excited and notice the problem and drive them to the website that will stencil right on the ramp so they can go there and learn more about the project and these messages that we want to raise awareness about and that we feel are really, really important. And similar to the fallout of the bike project, the message went viral. All of a sudden, people were getting in touch with us from across the country, and we enabled ourselves to help out those champions that we were hearing from different communities across the country. And now, consequently, we have over 50 communities participating right from coast to coast. And there's over 1,300 ramps out in the world these days. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah, thank you. And you know what? We're hearing from people all around the world. So we just had Melanie from our team's here tonight, and she had a conversation with somebody from Brazil. So this isn't just a Toronto-centric issue. It's a global issue. Here in Ontario, we enjoy having barrier-free legislation, the AODA, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And this is a really important piece of legislation that mandates that Ontario become fully barrier-free by 2025. Yeah. That's a really, really important and ambitious goal, but there's some gaps. There's unfortunately only 40% compliance across most business sectors. So there's lack of participation. And this picture that I've got up on the screen here kind of describes that in some cases we're actually falling behind and being a little regressive in this desire to be barrier-free by 2025. So the picture on the left shows a storefront on Spadina that was taken 2 years ago. It's got a beautiful ramp. The picture on the right shows a photo that was taken just last year. Same storefront, but they installed a step over top of that original ramp. So we've got a long way to go. And raising awareness about why accessibility is so important is key, is really key to, well, upholding our desire as Ontarians to live in a fully barrier-free Ontario and beyond. Flip the slide. This is a photo of someone brushing their teeth with an electric toothbrush. And if you can, I'd like you to raise your hand if you use an electric toothbrush. All right, so keep your hand up. Raise your hand if you can, if you use a touch screen. Use a touch screen. All right, keep your hands up. You know where I'm going. I want all of us to have our hands up after the next few seconds here. If you've ever sent an email, if you've ever used a curb cut crossing the street at an intersection. So all of these things, we all have our hands up. It's amazing. And it goes to describe how when we put something in place for someone with a disability, we all end up benefiting, because those are designs that were originally intended to help enable someone with a disability. And now we just all use them. They're all part of our, not only our urban fabric, but our everyday lives. This is Ramp Man. Some of you may have seen him around the Spadina neighborhood, maybe Paul, maybe. But Ramp Man and I have never been seen in the same room together. And Ramp Man, he embodies a core value of ours, and that's having fun. And fun happens to be a word that Jane shared about our intention to gather here tonight, to have fun, talk about these really important issues. And I believe that it's a key ingredient to creating social impact and making change in our communities. Frustration, what I talked about at the beginning, is also one of those key ingredients. Raising awareness, having many people on deck, being disruptive. Those ramps, they encroach on city property. They don't abide by current city bylaws. And putting people first. All of these things are key ingredients to helping make our communities well-suited for all of us. So you're gonna learn a lot of things tonight, and I invite you to take everything that you've learned and share. Raise awareness, share on social media, and be ambassadors. Yeah, I invite you to go through those doors as ambassadors to this really important work. So excited to answer any questions and dialogue more tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luke. All right, now moving on to Darren. I'm going to tell you a couple things about Darren. Darren has joined us from Houston, or Austin, as we said this evening. He is an internationally recognized as a visionary thought leader in global diversity and inclusion, smart city innovation, and human-centered urban design. Now, as a person with multiple non-visible disabilities, Darren has advocated effectively for a bottom-up, people-centered design approach to city building. He's a champion of LGBTQ rights, and Darren is also the founder of the Smart Cities Library, which is the world's largest online collection of resources aimed at helping people design smarter, more inclusive cities and spaces. So Darren, take it away.
Thank you very much. Well, first I'd like to say, you guys hear me? Great. First, I'd like to say thank you so much to Sidewalk Toronto. Thank you to my panelists for this amazing opportunity to be here tonight and to talk to each and every one of you about accessible and inclusive smart cities. It's a passion of mine. It's something that I want to convey that is about all of us. And like Luke said about disability, disability is never the barrier. So it's really important for me to talk to you guys tonight about accessibility and inclusion. A little bit about me, a little more than what Jane said. Thank you for the lovely things that Jane said. Thank you very much. But it's important that I share with you that I'm also a lifelong advocate and champion of equality and social justice for the LGBT community and for people with disabilities. And most importantly, I'm a person with multiple non-visible disabilities. A person with multiple non-visible disabilities. I'm also gay, biracial, and I was born in the Deep South, which I guess for Canada, that means south of the border, right? South of the border in America. So I was at the south of the border, south, south, south. And I was born during the turbulent times of America's civil rights movement back in the 1960s. And some of my friends would say to me now, since they know that fact and I say it publicly, they tell me that I'm an up-and-coming senior citizen. Which, okay, that's probably true, and I'm going to wear it as a badge because I think diversity is our strength. So if you recap what I am, I'm an up-and-coming senior citizen, I'm disabled, I'm gay, I'm biracial, and if that's not enough, I'm also a person who has fought and survived multiple forms of discrimination. And because of that, and because of the other things I'm going to share with you tonight, I strongly believe, next slide, that smart cities are for everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. I mean all people. All means all. Smart cities must blend and braid people-centered urban design. And what that is putting people first, like Luke said, putting people first during the processes, during the development, the planning, the activities, on and before regular people-centered process where people have an opportunity to co-create where they want to call home. So we must blend and braid people-centered urban design strategies with cutting-edge, accessible, and inclusive technology to make sure that no citizen is left behind or accidentally forgotten due to urbanization or technology innovation. Smart cities must be designed by the people and for the people to provide real public value. They must be created in a much more agile way, in a ways that makes public services inclusive, usable, accessible to everyone. That includes seniors, that includes people with disabilities. Again, all people, so all means all. Next slide. This slide here is an interesting slide because what it says is, it was an artist made this slide back in the 1950s, if you can't tell, and it says a smart city is a connected city, and a connected city is an inclusive and accessible city. And when I put this slide, something interesting about this, a lesson learned, when I put this slide up on social media, I had a few social media Twitter trolls say, Mr. Darren, Mr. Inclusion, Mr. Accessibility, why do you have all these white people in this slide? Any of you guys thinking that? You are? Okay, well, get ready. And I thought to myself, maybe I made a mistake, but I didn't really, because it really embodies a person like me, because any one of these people could be biracial, they could be deaf, they could be blind, they could be deaf-blind, they could be gay like me, they could, they could be a lesbian, we don't even see half the bodies here, who knows what's going on underneath. But the point of the matter is check your implicit bias, because actually these people are more inclusive than you think. I mean, there's a lady there with red hair and a guy with blue. So again, just lesson learned, check your implicit bias. All right, so the reason why I even put this slide, though, is to say, okay, what is a smart city? What is a connected city? Well, in my opinion, a smart city is a connected city, and a connected city is an inclusive and accessible city. So I want to imagine, I want you guys to just join me for a little bit, like 1 minute, and I want you to imagine an individual with multiple disabilities. This might be you, not be like me with multiple non-apparent disabilities, but someone with low vision or a prosthetic hand, or someone who uses a wheelchair, or all of the above, and let's just call her Dolores. And now imagine Dolores is leaving her downtown office, so she's gainfully employed, and she's on her way home, but she has a few hours, and she wants to check out her local park. And because she's in a connected city, an accessible city, an inclusive city, she can easily roll down the accessible downtown sidewalk, go to the nearest public transit bus stop using available curb cuts, avoiding all access barriers, and Dolores can hop on accessible, available, affordable public transit, and she can go to her favorite park. And while she's at that park, she can connect to the city's Wi-Fi. And she can use believe this or not, she can use a self-service kiosk because it's accessible, because it has color contrast, because it has audio and visible cues. And she can find out through that kiosk about upcoming park events and learn a little bit about the city's history and what's going to happen in the trees and the monuments in the park. And she loves this park because she's able to access and use all of its public services because it's connected, it's inclusive, and it's accessible. And before she leaves, Dolores uses an accessible wayfinding navigation application. Anyone know anything about that? to map out her next destination. And so then off she goes. Her name's Dolores, not Mayan. The point is she goes independently, like Luke said, independently, without having to ask someone to put up a ramp, without having to ask someone to take down a ramp, just like everybody else. Okay, maybe the story's a little cheesy. I see some of you going, but maybe it's a little cheesy, but the point of the matter is, and I know we're asking a lot in this story, we're asking about, I can even go back further. Dolores starts her day with affordable, accessible housing. Then she goes to her accessible workplace, thank you. And then she moves on, and we're talking about accessible sidewalks, accessible public transit, kiosks, apps. But the point I'm trying to make here is that disability is never the barrier. With everything in place, with a smart city being connected, accessible, inclusive, disability is never the barrier. Next slide. Here's my friend, Haben Girma. Does anyone know Haben Girma or have read anything about her? Okay. She's internationally known, and she's a friend of mine. And this is a photograph of Haben and her brand new seeing eye dog, Milo. Her other seeing eye dog she loved went to heaven, but Milo is her brand new 2-year-old seeing eye dog. And Haben is the first deaf-blind person to graduate from Harvard Law School. And President Obama named her a White House champion of change. Haben advocates for equal opportunities for people with disabilities, traveling all over the world, all over the globe, like me today, speaking about the benefits of fully accessible products and inclusive services. And this is what Haben says. These are her words, and it means a lot. Disability never holds anyone back. Disability is not something that people need to overcome. The barriers that exist are created by society, and it's up to every single one of us. It's up to each one of us to work together, to collaborate, to remove those barriers. That says it all to me. Disability is never the barrier. It's up to us to work together as architects, as planners, as advocates, as champions, as people with disabilities, as all intersectionality to build the city that we want to live in. Next slide. Okay. Does anyone in the audience want to describe the slide? Don't be scared. Anybody? Okay, go for it. All right, Thea.
Okay, I'll give this a try. We see an unhappy man standing with his arms at the side. He has an unhappy mouth, perhaps even angry. He's staring straight ahead, and above his eyes, his head has been tipped open to the side, and inside, instead of a brain, it looks like we're looking at a smelly pile of poo.
Wow, that's excellent, especially the steaming pile of poo. You see the steam. That's exactly right. And yes, he's gender fluid. But I call this slide damn dumb. Damn dumb. This is my slide on my notes, damn dumb. And here's why. And here's what I know. By 2050, 2 billion people, that's approximately 20%, give or take, of the world's population will be over 60. And we should all know in this room that disability rises with age. If we continue to design cities as though everyone's 30 years old, active, without disability, the result will continue to be cities that are biased, non-accessible, non-inclusive, and just damn dumb. If we're lucky, that's why damn dumb. If we're lucky, we're gonna become old, and our bodies will change. And everybody deserves dignity and access at every single stage of our lives. When you make something accessible, inclusive, when you make a technology accessible, when you make a building accessible, you're doing it for you, and you're doing it for your community. When you build accessible and inclusive smart cities, you're investing in you. Next slide. Now, these are just some slides I'm going to read because they're facts that I hold true. A city will not become a smart city if it doesn't meet the needs of all citizens, including the 1 billion disabled persons around the world. Next slide. A city isn't smart. A city isn't smart because it uses technology. Next slide. A city is smart because the technology it uses is accessible and purposely inclusive, raising the quality of life for everybody. All people. That means everyone. And again, it's up to each of us to take the actions necessary to ensure technology, smart cities, infrastructure is designed with all kinds of people, all kinds of users, all kinds of abilities in mind. All means all. I want people to say it with me. All means all. Okay, we're gonna get better at that. We're gonna do that one more time. We're gonna get better at that. This is being filmed. Okay, this brings me to why I developed the Smart City Library. Next slide. I'm not going to go into it, but you can go to the Smart City Library yourself, and there's some cards at the front of the room. You might have them at your chair, I'm not sure. But they look just like this old library from the 15th century that's got beautiful wood, and it's got murals on top, like the Sistine Chapel. The Smart City Library is the premier, as Jane said, online resource that's full of vetted, promising practices from around the world. Articles that are written by scholars, articles that are written by by advocates, people like Mayan and Luke, and everything is vetted. When you go there, everything there is about people with disabilities, accessibility, and inclusion for smart cities. And I wanted to make sure that this was a free, no-cost website, so anyone could go there and anyone could read the articles, and it's updated daily, and I'm really, really proud of it. So on your own, take the time to look at it. We rotate the top 10 categories, and right now, I think for this month, we have accessibility, inclusion, people-centered urban design, citizen co-creation, citizen engagement, digital inclusion, digital literacy. But one of the big things that we go to all the time is about citizen engagement. And I want to tell you a story that a city that I worked on. It could have been Corpus Christi, it could have been Austin, it could have been Boston, it could have been any city. But it's about how you can get good data and how you can get bad data, and how you really engage the community. This city that I happened to live in at the time, so that would give you a hint if you look at where I lived, it had potholes left and right. I wouldn't even try to change my broken windshield in my car, because every time I would change it, at a $500 copay, I'd hit a rock or a pothole and crack again. So I was part of a team to try to develop some remediation, some accessibility, and we also, for some reason, thought we'd tackle potholes and sidewalks, which is a lot to ask. But the project kind of took its own way, and City Council thought it would be a great idea to hire Lyft or Uber or another ride-sharing company while they're traveling around in a demonstration pilot to, in real time, crowdsource where all the potholes were in the city. And they gave them 6 months to do it and $1 million. So in 6 months, the guy came to City Council and he said, City Council, your city doesn't have any potholes. And everybody was just floored, even the City Council member. And people didn't understand. And then finally they figured it out. It's because the people who use ride sharing, Lyft and Uber, don't live in marginalized communities oftentimes. They're more affluent, they're more downtown, they're more urban. And so where Uber and Lyft and the other ride-sharing companies go, there were no potholes. So to them, the city didn't have any potholes. And you know, it's a really good example of how you can accidentally leave a whole community, a whole demographic out because you don't intentionally seek everyone. So in all your projects and your smart cities, everything that you do, you should ask yourself 3 questions. Who's not included in the work I'm doing? What are the reasons or parameters why there's exclusion? And what can I do now? What can I do now to make sure everyone's included? And say that to yourself over and over. It's kind of like a wash your hair, rinse and repeat kind of thing. Because that's the only way you're going to make sure you include everybody in the course of your work. Try it. It's a good practice. Next slide. All right, I know my time's out. So this is a slide of an architectural blueprint. And this is what I want to say. Challenges facing smart cities are best solved through collaboration, like what we're doing here today. Working together using people-centered urban design practices and meaningful citizen engagement, citizen co-creation, and citizen empowerment strategies, we can create a new blueprint for accessible and inclusive cities, where public services are designed by the people, for the people, and where the quality of life is raised for everyone, and where government acts upon a central commitment to leave no person behind. Next slide. If nothing I said made sense, and that's highly possible. Next slide. This is a picture of my bulldog. This is Buddy the bulldog, and he's in his yard. He's got his blue bone. He's waiting for his daddy to come back home. And this is what I say. If nothing I said made any sense, remember this. This is what Buddy the bulldog would say. He's actually the mascot for the Smart City Library. Build a smart city that works for a 9-year-old and a 90-year-old. And you'll build a smart city that works for all. Everyone, all people. Now, say it with me. All means all. All right, thank you, Toronto.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you very much. All means all. Got it. We have 880 cities in Toronto. It's kind of, but I like this. This is even more inclusive. 9 to 90. Got 9 more years in there. Let's do it. Okay. Over to Mayan Ziv. Mayan is an activist, a photographer, and a founder of Access Now, which is a crowdsourced mobile app that maps the accessibility status of locations around the world. Living with muscular dystrophy has led Mayan to become passionate about creating a more accessible world. And she's pretty damn good at it. Mayan's contributions to inclusion and innovative solutions have won her admiration and accolades, including the City of Toronto Access Award and the David C. Only Leadership in Accessibility Award. So take it away, Mayan.
All right, thanks, Jane. Hi, everyone. Can you all see me on all edges? Do I have to move? Is there anyone who cannot see me? I see people waving. Okay, so I'm just gonna smush over if that's okay.
Yeah.
Just so that sight lines are good.
Yep.
I don't wanna should I just go in the middle of the two dudes?
We
on
could
the
also
stage?
bring a couple of chairs, like the chairs in the front row there that aren't being used.
I'm
we
just
could
gonna do this.
Bring them
Yeah,
over
is
here.
that okay?
Yep.
Okay, we're switching.
Fab, you
That's
do.
a perfect introduction for me. I just mess everything up right away. All right. Hi. I think that's better. Now I can see all you folks on the side as well. My name is Mayan Ziv. I'm really excited to be here. I live in Toronto, and it's a city that I love. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work that I do, and then we'll get into discussion. So that's me. This is a picture of me when I was about 6, maybe, using a walker in a park in Toronto. And I've had a disability my whole life. I have a type of muscular dystrophy, as Jane mentioned, and so I've often had to be creative to figure out how to engage with my environments. So whether that is making a makeshift or a StopGap ramp before I knew Luke, or whether that is to call ahead and figure out how I'm going to get into a place that's not accessible, or show up, at a restaurant and go through the kitchen to get in, or convince everyone in my community to rally together to do something big. Often, my life has invited me to figure out new ways or different ways of doing things. And that's led me until today. I'm still doing that. So this is a picture of me in Barcelona. Photography is one of my passions, and one of the things that I love to do all the time, everywhere. I might be taking a photo of you right now, and you don't know. Who knows? I'm not. Don't worry. And I am here in Barcelona on not my regular wheelchair that I usually use, but a metal frame that was very graciously offered to me from the hotel that I was staying at the time, and a cushion that I took from the very swanky hotel lobby because my wheelchair broke on the flight. So when I arrived, I had no means of mobility, and we figured it out. And yes, that is a terry cloth bathrobe sash, let's call it, that's holding me in so that as I go over cobblestones, I'm not literally falling out of the chair. And so as you might expect, there are many barriers. Things as simple as, like this photo describes, one step that leads to a restaurant here in the city that will not be named, which is called Fran's. And this photo was actually taken during a photography photo walk that we did in the city that focused on accessibility. So I like to include it because I think it just very easily depicts a very simple challenge, one that my friend here, Luke, is looking to address basically every day, all the time, even when he's sleeping. And so this was frustrating to me and maintains to be frustrating because I want to go to restaurants, maybe not Fran's specifically, but, sorry, Fran's. But I want to be able to go anywhere. And I don't want to have to deal with this experience when I show up at a location and not know if I can get in or not. And that's really what sparked the journey that I'm on now and the creation of Access Now. So basically, Access Now was born here in Toronto, actually straight out of my master's program at Ryerson University. And it started with wanting to go to a bar with my friends from class. We wanted to go and celebrate, and we couldn't figure out if the place we wanted to go to was accessible. Classic story. And so on our way over there, I just went like, why aren't there apps for this? Why are there so many tools and so many ways to figure out so many things to do, but I can't just figure out if the place that we're on our way to is actually going to be accessible for me? And so that's kind of where the aha moment happened. It doesn't really happen often in my life where I have aha moments, but this was actually one of them. And it led to 3 years actually now of Access Now being something that's turned into much bigger than my own personal story of just wanting to get drunk with my classmates. Basically, the idea was, why don't people just share what they know that is accessible? What if every single person who ever went to any place in the whole world was to just simply let the community know within a couple seconds if that place was accessible or not, if that place had an accessible washroom or not, if it had an automatic door at the entrance, if it had an elevator, if it had a ramp, if it had Braille as an option or ASL as an option, or 17 different options that we crowdsourced through a community of people saying, this matters to me. When I go somewhere, I need this accommodation. And so we crowdsourced the actual list that we've used now to generate information on the app. So in a nutshell, in like one sentence, if I was to describe what Access Now is, it's a mobile app that allows people to search and find places that hopefully meet their needs based on the crowdsourced collective community of people rating information and sharing that. So that once you search and you rate, then you can discover. And that for me is the most exciting part, and that's what I like to spend all my time on, is rallying communities to build up this really powerful resource that can allow people to not just go to the restaurants they know or go to the schools that they know or show up at a job interview at an office that they already know is accessible, but actually discover a world beyond their borders. To discover accessible places in Tel Aviv, in Brazil, in wherever you want to go. I want to be able to open up the world and put accessibility at the forefront. So let's look at that, right? So this is just a quick picture I wanted to put in before I get into the really nerdy like tech talk. Apparently that's my role on this panel, is to be the techie. This is an image of about 50 of us at Yonge and Dundas Square here in Toronto on a collective combined photo walk and map mission. So basically what we do often is pick places in the city, bring people together, and then we go on a walk. Sound familiar? And we look at the places around us and we take photographs like the one that was shown earlier of the one step. And we rate places that have not yet been added to the map. And we started doing this right away when we launched, and now this is something that communities and school groups are doing on their own. So in the States and beyond, cities everywhere have reached out and said, we want to lead our own map missions. So this is just kind of an example of a bunch of us in very late November being freezing and happy this is the beginning, I should mention, of the walk before we did it. The photo at the end is a little bit different. Still happy, but more freezing. Okay, so this is an image of the same intersection that I just showed you, but this is an image on Access Now. So on our website, if you go to our map, that's kind of the funnest ways to play on a macro level, because you can start to really see patterns and interesting correlations of data. So this is Yonge and Dundas Square, and right across the street there's the Ryerson Student Learning Center, which is rated as accessible. And if you were to click more info, you would get a lot more info about what's actually there, the accommodations, and probably someone's description. So the way we go about ratings, beyond the 17 tags that are just descriptive that you can just click and add, like if you were at a buffet. Hopefully there's so many to choose from that you have to pick them all. That's the best accessible place. But our top level is green, thumbs up for accessible, red thumbs down for not accessible, and partial accessible, which is our yellow in-between category. And that's the first level that you interact with when you look at any place on our map. So that's young and Dundas. If we jump over to here, it looks a little bit different. Here we see one pin in our immediate surroundings, which happens to be this location. This pin actually popped up a couple days ago. Recently, someone added sidewalk labs and wrote ramp to enter, elevator on site. And if you look around the area, there are not as many pins. There are some green ones, some red ones, and perhaps it's not a bustling area. But if you're someone who needs access, you might actually have to travel a little bit further if you actually want to engage with something. If you zoom out on the map, you start to get a sense of what the power of community can really do. So when we launched in Toronto, we had about 150 pins. And as you can see now, things have kind of exploded. We have cities across Canada, throughout the States, popping up on our map. And it's all just through the power of community. People who either experience disability, know someone that does, or doesn't, and just cares about accessibility and contributes. And we make that very clear, that Access Now is not just actually about disability, which often when we engage with people is the assumption. But as Luke very eloquently mentioned, accessibility benefits many other communities. So one of our top groups, other than people with disabilities or families and friends, are parents who use strollers. And this has actually become an app that is quite popular in that community as well, because if you're going, for example, through the subway system here, you actually can't get off at every station and expect an elevator. So being able to know in advance when you're planning a route is really helpful. And when you zoom out all the way on the map and you look at Access Now today, you see clusters of information forming. Each of these blue nodes, if you would click on it, expands and shows you more and more cities that have been contributed. So to date, we're actually in 32 different countries. And it's kind of just the beginning for us. When I look at this, I see an exciting community that's evolving around the world, but a lot of work that still needs to be done. A lot more engagement, a lot more people who can contribute. And that's what we work on every day, is engaging with people who can become allies and community members, whether they be in school or whether they work in an office somewhere or whether they're traveling through a park one day and they go, wow, I never realized that the pavement here is actually friendly for wheelchairs to go onto the actual playground as well. And so I see the beginning of something huge, but a lot of work that needs to be done. And everyone here can be a part of it. It's as simple as downloading the app and adding your first pin today. Think about the place that you might have gotten coffee at today. Was it accessible? Do you know? If you go through our app, it'll start to prompt you and ask you questions like, does it have an accessible washroom? Et cetera, et cetera. And every pin counts, hashtag that. So beyond just crowdsourcing data, you see now I'm gonna get a little even more techie with you. You can start to analyze and work with this data to actually influence the way that we understand our cities and really convert them into smart, accessible, inclusive cities. So what you see up on the screen right now is part of a research project that was done in collaboration with Ryerson University's geography students. They were given a very small sample set of 2,000 pins, and they were asked to just interpret, extrapolate, look at that data, what trends do you find, and everyone was basically allowed to do different things with that data set. So in this data set, the way that they've chosen to represent it, you can actually kind of see that as you go down into the downtown core, the data is a lot more dense and there's a lot more activity. But as you spread out, there are fewer and fewer pockets of information, which could leave someone who might need access with a lot of question marks. So those are the kinds of areas we want to hit. And it's interesting that there's a line that kind of goes up the center. I don't know if you can see it, but basically there are a bunch of dots that from the center go all the way up, and that's actually Yonge Street. So just interesting that there are a lot more people who are thinking about access, at least, adding pins on Yonge Street. Okay, so this is another project that one of the students did, where they looked at campuses. They looked at engagement on university campuses and what crowdsourcing activity was happening there. So if you are a student with a disability and you go to Ryerson, Access Now is pretty helpful because there are tons of data points that would allow people to navigate that area and determine for themselves if they actually can do the things they want in an accessible way. If you're a student who goes to University of Toronto, there is still quite a bit of information, but you might have to travel to actually find something that is accessible. And if you go to York, well, you're just kind of out of luck because at the moment, or at least when this data set was offered to students, there really wasn't anything. And that was 2 years ago, actually. And so if you look at the data now on York, we did actually kind of go in and go, hey, York students, pick it up because you suck. Like, not actually, we didn't say you suck, but we just said, we challenged them. We said, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if when students went to York, they had a resource that would allow them to navigate on campus, off campus, and figure out if things were accessible? And I remember one of the students came up to me after our presentation and said, you know, I'm on the event planning committee, and I can never figure out where we're going to have an event because I always end up alienating or excluding someone, and I feel really bad. So it would be awesome if this actually worked here. But it is really all up to the crowd. It's not just me and a couple of people running around the entire city adding pins. It's really up to the community to make this work. So our job is to encourage, hone, invite, celebrate, shame on occasion, in a cheeky way, friendly way, always positive, I promise. A community that could really blossom into something that could inform the way that we develop and design smart cities, which leads us kind of into the third analysis or a different way of looking at the data, which I wanted to bring up, which to me was really interesting because this student chose to look at basically like 3 different heat maps that would allow you to understand how much information was accessible versus not accessible. This was challenging, and we did actually kind of struggle with it because we tend to have more people sharing accessible places on the app than not accessible ones, which makes sense because people are usually sharing places that they went to and had a good experience. There definitely are days where we get influx of pins that are all red, and that's usually someone on a rampage or a rant being like, I hate all of these accessible places. It's a good outlet. I do it sometimes. It helps to get it out, but it's also a way to keep people accountable. It's a way to flag things and say, this place over here is not accessible. But that's not where the story ends. Because once we see red zones on our map like this, we can start to look at them and address them. With actual information, we can actually go to those areas in the city and say, you know what? There's a lot of work that needs to be done in Yorkville. Because if I'm using a wheelchair, let's say, there's not that much that I can actually engage with. So we want to use the data not just as a discovery tool for people to engage with lifestyle or education or whatever it is that they're interested in, but also as a city planning tool, as a way to inform our smart cities and put pressure where needed to actually create change. Which leads me into the last thing that I'm going to talk about. I promise I'm not going to talk the whole night, unless you want me to. Just kidding. Which is a newer project that we're working on that I was just really excited about and I wanted to share. So early on in our brainstorming, we thought, wouldn't it be great if you could find accessible places and find accessible routes to get there and have accessible transportation that would take you there and close the whole loop? Yeah, right? That would kind of be the best. So we started with pins because that made the most sense. Pins, physical locations that people could go to. But now we're also testing routes, pathways, trails, and starting to draw lines on our map as well as just dots. Lines that actually can determine which trails, which pathways are accessible for everyone as well. So the image that you see up on the screen right now is Anthony. He's a para-athlete. He's sitting in an Icon mountain bike, which is fully motorized and super powerful and so fun and scary if you're me, because like I'm just scared of really fast things. But it's like a super awesome thing. Anyway, check it out if you like adventure. I like adventure, but I like it in my wheelchair. And we've mounted a Google Trekker 360 camera unit to this Icon mountain bike. This was a project that started last year, and this is how we did it the first time, with our friends at Google, with our friends at the City of Toronto, with our friends at Pan Am Path. We started mapping the Pan Am Path, an 85-kilometer stretch that goes from the west side of the city to the east. And we captured it in 360 video from the perspective of someone who experiences disability. Because accessibility, from our perspective, should be first, not let's build everything, figure out at the end if we made it right. So by doing this, by capturing it in 360, we wanted to ensure that it was going to be accessible. Taking that data then and actually uploading it directly to Google, so if you went to Google Street View right now, you would see all of the lines that we've begun mapping through the Access Now account, and you start to understand that all of the lines that we're drawing are accessible ones, because we're doing them from the perspective of accessibility first. So if we can't go there, we're assuming they're not accessible right now. Dead zones. And it can be used not just for people who want to figure out if the pathways are accessible for them. It can be used not just to encourage people to get out and explore spaces that they assumed were not accessible but actually are. But it can also be used by city planners. And we've heard that this has been a really great tool, not just for people who want to go out and do things, but also for the city to be able to go on Google and see exactly what's around and see, is there a pothole or is there an area that actually has steps and someone would have to reroute. And that's just a newer project that we're working on that we're really excited about. We've been doing it again this summer and into fall, Devin. And we're looking to see where this goes. The idea eventually is to be able to draw lines everywhere and crowdsource it as well. So if people have cameras on them and they're able to take photos and contribute those as well, we can start to draw lines all over the world. I'm just leaving it with you with this picture because it's fun. This is part of a photo walk that we did in the fall last year, which means another one is coming up. Okay, Mayan, get to work. But basically, we went through the city and accidentally created a protest. So basically what happened was we brought a bunch of people together, photographers, people from the accessibility community, and we went to take photos and add pins. But this year we thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we also created signs and people could like put them in different parts of the city and take photographs of those and create like environmental portraits of advocacy statements. So nothing about us without us, or accessibility benefits everyone, or there is strength and diversity, just really simple things that we believe in. What ended up happening though is we were marching through the city with these signs, and people would stop and ask us questions and be like, what is this for? And Access Kindness kind of became a really exciting hashtag that you could follow along because other people around the world started doing the same thing. So again, everything that we do really starts with thinking about accessibility first. It starts with thinking about community involvement and how can we take grassroots efforts and build them big enough to create huge change that can affect the way we live in our cities and everywhere. Now I'm going to stop talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayan. You know what? Stay there, Mayan. Let's see if we can get everyone a little bit further up the stage so everyone's got good sight lines. Is that all right, Darren? Pull yourself up there. Okay. It actually occurred to me that, do you want to take the mic? Here's one of the mics to take. Because we're going to do a little quickie bit of audience question here. Did anyone have any trouble arriving here today? Has anyone? Oh, someone over here. Let's get what your accessibility limitation was to arriving today.
I'm hobbling along on a cane. I got in touch with the TTC to find out how to get here. They told me the only way was to take the streetcar to Parliament and walk down. It was a long walk with a bad knee.
Which is also, well, crappy, but wrong information, because there's actually a bus that goes on Lakeshore. So, you remember the Crunchy Bar and the Frankenstein thing? Almost, so close. They even have a bus route, but they don't even know they got a bus route. You had a terrible time, so awful. Who else had trouble, any kind of accessibility limitation, getting here, getting in the building, getting to the washroom, anything? Wow, pretty good. What about if we broaden it out from not just getting here to like your whole day? Did anyone experience any environmental limitations in how they moved around? Yeah, mic over there. Here, use this one. What happened?
Yeah, so as I was actually leaving my building to come here today, I live on the 16th floor of my condo, and the elevator stopped working. Just didn't operate, so I had to take the 16 floors of stairs down. But I imagine that could be very difficult if I wasn't able to walk.
Thankfully, at least it was on the way down, not up. But yeah, totally. Who else? Did anyone ride a bike here, by the way? You like that? Yeah, I'm going to count you, because like it's a bit of a death ride, right, to be in Toronto. How are you liking biking in Toronto?
Scary. I mean, it's scary. I mean, even being a driver, being around bikes, let alone being a bike around cars. So.
It's true. It's actually scary. I drive a car as well. Sometimes it's just scary to share the road. Not well designed. What was your interaction with inaccessibility today?
So I'm hard of hearing, and I have difficulty with overhead announcements. And I was coming here on the GO train, and the speakers in my particular GO train were not working very well, so I was having a hard time hearing the stops. Now, I'm quite familiar with the track, so that wasn't too much of an issue, except I started reading a book, and I wasn't paying attention, and then I started to panic. Wait a minute, where am I? Have I missed my stop? So that was a real issue for me today.
Good one. Anyone else? Yes. Oh, you're going to move the mic around. Everything else go pretty smoothly? No major issues? Liza, was it all smooth sailing out there in accessibility land? Just like generic, it's not easy, right? I find that, even the signal lights. Does anyone know what a semi-actuated pedestrian signal is? Sounds horrific, right? Do you know what that is, Drew? I mean, it's pedestrian geeky. Maybe Devin knows. You never stand at the light and you're waiting for the pedestrian signal to go, and all of a sudden the traffic gets the green, the cars get the green, but you don't get the white pedestrian sign. And there's no left or right happening. It's like, oh wait, the semi-actuated means you have to actually press the button regardless of, it'll never show pedestrian time to go unless you press the button. Like, who knows that? It's either time for you to cross the road with the traffic or not. Semi-actuated, like terrible. So as a pedestrian activist, I would know this, but you'd have to have literally like DEFCON 5 kind of access to that information to know how that thing works. So of course you step out and it's a bit scary, you step back. So it's a bit of a nightmare. So my point is, it's sort of, if you listen to these amazing advocates and activists, it's sort of a no-brainer to do this, right? An accessible city is a city that's good for everyone. 8 to 80, 9 to 90, all for all. Everyone can use it. My mom, who's getting around in a cane now, strollers, babies, everyone loves it. Skateboarders love a ramp. So the question I have now for the panel is, what the hell's going on? why is this not happening? There's even laws out there that says it's going to happen. So I don't know, maybe like before we get into a bit more nitty-gritty on the solutions, what's your take on why this is not happening? Luke.
Great question. Well, accessibility was certainly the farthest thing off of my radar at one time in my life. And I was thrust into the world of inaccessibility 16 years ago when I fell off my bike. So I get it. I was completely ignorant. I had no idea why any of this was important to me or anyone else. There wasn't anybody in my circle of friends or community with a disability. So there was just a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness. And that's why I was really hammering on the awareness raising awareness about these issues that really affect all of us. Yeah, those examples that I was giving, we don't even really think about how those examples are just a part of our everyday lives and how they really make life more efficient. And yeah, we're calling on you. There's a call to action tonight to share that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we need those mics back wherever they are. You got one, Diane? All right. Do you want to? We'll keep the mics up here until we get more into the Q&A. But do you want to add anything?
Yeah,
Why is it happening?
So my favorite thing to do when I'm on panels with Luke is give him a hard time. And I'm going to actually flip that on its head and say that I'm tired of awareness. I'm tired of telling stories and waiting for action. PSAs that show people who need help and then the call at the end of it. I'm thinking we just need to move. We need to do things, and maybe through action we can generate awareness. So I like to think of two things. First of all, I think that we need much greater representation from people who actually experience accessibility needs everywhere, so that people with that experience and the diversity that comes along with it are included in every component that needs to be designed in our world. So not a group of consultants that come on at the end and are handed a plan and are asked, what do you think of everything we did? But actually are part of co-creating accessible futures, accessible products, accessible experiences, accessible everything. And designers who actually understand that. So I know that Luke does a lot of work, and I'm sorry, Darren, I just know Luke because he's like ramp man, you know? But I'm sure that you're doing the same thing also in the States, which is educating people before they grow up and become adults and make mistakes. So I'm just like plugging you. I'm giving you a hard time, but also giving you a plug. Okay. Reaching people when they're in school. Reaching people when they're still growing up and learning about what they want to be in the world and what they want to do in the world, and whether you have a disability or you don't, understanding that accessibility should be a part of that. So if you're designing an application, knowing that that application should be accessible. If you're making a website, knowing that that should be accessible from the beginning and not afterwards. So I think let's not educate and hope that people change, although yes, we should do that. But let's create change, actually like on the ground, make things happen, and see if that influences the way that people actually understand something.
Darren, do you want to add anything to why you think this isn't happening?
Well, let me go back to a story about accessibility, because again, I'm from America. I'm coming from Austin, and my flight yesterday went fantastic until I hit the airport here. And when I hit the airport here, I had to go through customs, and so it's a very narrow. Here's the arrow. You cannot go anywhere else, or a guard will come get you. So all these people are going. It says customs downstairs. And I'm thinking, okay, so I get to where the customs supposed to be, and the escalator is broken, is not working. I can't take stairs because of my non-apparent disability. And the elevator next to the escalator was also broke. So I stood there not knowing who to call. Is there a fire alarm? Or what do I need to do? Because everybody else, almost it seemed, was taking the escalator up the stairs, the manual escalator. And I was sitting there saying, what do I do? Until finally I decided to go the wrong direction. And a guard said, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing, sir? And so I explained to him, well, I don't know what else to do. And I got his attention, and 20, 30 minutes later, they got the elevator working. And so I took the elevator, along with a few other people that joined me that had been waiting. But that's just something that, me, a person with, a non-apparent disability, I can't take stairs. It happened. So it affects everyone. And I want to join my panel here, and I agree with both of you. And I think when I'm asked to speak at different cities, I always try to meet them on the spectrum of accessibility. And who knows, and inclusion. And every city is different. And I know in some of your, in some of their literature for this, it was about one does not fit, one fits one. Yes, and that's true because I don't ever know, or there isn't one answer for everybody. Basically, I never know where a city is on the spectrum of accessibility inclusion. I like to meet them where they're at and be a good ambassador. And what I really believe is that we all need to be advocates, not only people with disabilities, but their families, their friends, and their allies. When I was growing up, and my family has people with disabilities in it, and we'd go to a drive-through, they wouldn't even advocate if they didn't get ketchup for their French fries. And it was like, I'm just not gonna do it. No, you need to do it. Like Mayan said, we need to take action. And there needs to be more people with disabilities on boards in elected office, at conventions, at annual conferences, because without the voice of people with disabilities, you're degrading the conversation, and really, truly inclusive solutions are going to be hard to find.
Can we talk about places that are blazing trails? Either cities or communities where they are in fact doing a better job at this. I had the occasion to hear Auckland mentioned by someone today as possibly a location that is doing better. But can you speak to where this is being done better? Anyone want to take that one?
I'll take it. I think there's a couple places in the United States that are doing great. San Diego's doing great because it has a very effective chief information, chief innovation and design champion. And often it takes a champion sometimes within local government to find other champions at the management level, at the staff level. I mean, the staff can be some of your best champions to really activate government. And what they really are doing is focusing on people-centered, human-centered urban design. And when they say all means all, they mean all means all. And it seems to have driven awareness and driven increased, ignited people's advocacy level to where they are attending meetings like this one, and they leave meetings like this inspired to go out and find ways to build a more inclusive and accessible world. There's also cities like Philadelphia that have a smart city access plan, and Chicago and Boston. Go online and look at Boston's playbook. It's accessibility and inclusion playbook. Google Boston accessibility, smart city, and they have a fantastic, fantastic playbook, a roadmap, let's say, for building accessible and inclusive cities. And it asks great questions, and some of the questions are, don't send us consultants and people to sell us stuff. Don't sell people, tech companies to come sell our city stuff. We want you, before you come to us in Boston, we want you to make sure that you can prove to us that you've talked to people, that you really have the real needs, that you've gone out into the community, you got out of your desk and you walked the community. You went to the Mayor's Committee for Persons with Disabilities. You went to the Independent Living Center. You met people at a rally or a march for disability rights. What have you. They want that to be proven first before they even listen to what tech you want to sell them, because basically, remediation costs a lot of money. So if you have a lamppost in the middle of a sidewalk, it's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars to make that sidewalk accessible. So like Mayan said, do it first. Make sure it gets together in accessibility first.
Amazing. Do you want to pick up on any of that? Other cities, other examples? Yeah.
Well, we live in one.
Okay, Toronto's doing pretty good?
Yeah, well, we've got a long way to go, but
Okay.
we should be proud to have legislation here in Ontario that mandates and lays down the ground rules for a barrier-free province, and of course that includes here in Toronto. And yeah, I hear you, Mayan. Thanks for challenging me on that. Awareness raising is working, though. And to stir the pot means to be disruptive. And as I was saying earlier, these ramps are not to code. They live on city property against current bylaws. But the city's listening. The city passed a motion last year to investigate how ramps can live on public property on a more permanent basis, and how the city can develop a granting system for business owners to retrofit their storefronts. And that all came out of our work with the ramps. So this is really exciting. And I just learned today that St. Mary's here in Ontario, they recently redid their whole main street and sloped sidewalks up to meet the entry level of storefronts. So this is really, really great stuff that we can celebrate here in Ontario, but we do have a long way to go. We can learn from our neighbors in the south who have had a Disabilities Act since the early 90s. So it's important. It's important to have guys like Darren up here sharing stories about how far they've come and how we can learn from them.
I also familiar, I think, as anyone is, if they're familiar with StopGap, the clever way that you've kind of involved youth in your, so I think it's sort of getting at what Mayan has been saying, which is get them at the earliest ages and being invested in change and almost knowing no other way. Can you explain how StopGap works at a school level, getting people involved in accessibility?
Yeah. We have a
smiles
school,
in there.
yeah, we just school champion Don out there.
Right, raise your hand. You're a school champion. Tell us what that means.
Well, Don was a past employee of the Rick Hansen Foundation and led the Rick Hansen School Program. We've, over the past 5 years, really developed our own school program where I share my story, I talk about the ramps and what we're doing at StopGap. And we teach kids about these two words, accessibility and inclusion, and disabilities. So the whole elementary curriculum from kindergarten to grade 8, we've built, and we're so excited to be able to get the kids out into the community and teach business owners about the things that they've learned. And there's like a ridiculous cute factor to watching kindergarten kids deliver a StopGap ramp in a red wagon to a business owner that is now aware of the importance of accessibility and the value of having a storefront that everyone can access. So it's important that we're just so passionate and we understand how important it is to all work together, no matter how old we are, but particularly the younger generation. They really hold the keys to a barrier-free world. They're the ones that we're going to be relying on to help us design things that work well for all of us as our aging population reaches that point where they start to experience changes to the way they move around. And they're a demanding population that has a big buying power, and they're going to be resistant to giving up some of their privileges.
So before we turn it over to sort of comments and questions, I wanted to sort of dig a little bit deeper into the technology sort of aspect of this. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but some people are kind of very interested in the data conversation that has come with this sidewalk lab conversation. So it would behoove me to sort of dig around a little bit more about data and smart cities and ownership and maybe monetization of that data. And I'm going to start with you, Mayan, because I know you've thought about this a lot, you know, the sort of upside of data and the downside. What do you suggest about navigating that and hitting a good balance of how we can use data to serve accessibility without overstepping privacy concerns?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most concerning questions of our time, actually, because we're generating technology and data that we don't even know yet what we will do with it. And there's a lot of trust that has to happen between even, let's say, Access Now and the community of people who are sharing information on our platform. The way that I see it, and I've heard people talk about it as well, is that the results are owned by the people. So for us, I can say at Access Now, every data point contributes to the potential for change. And we actually can't do that without people believing that that's possible. So we need the data to get to that step. But the data is not the outcome, it's the tool. It's not, we want to hoard all this data and keep it and, hang out with it and make tons of money off of it. For me, it's about public interest, and it should be open and shareable and transferable to the people who want to create change for positive good. So being able to work with data sets, even just as an example where we worked with geography students, as an option to start to understand the possibilities, recognizing that it should be private, that it should be secure, and it's stuff that we think about all the time, is that it can be anonymous as well. It's not like, hi, my Ziv, although I'm okay with it. Not everybody wants to be outed on the information that they share. So it's secure and anonymous. On our platform, if you add a PIN, only you know that you added that PIN and nobody else does. So everyone contributes to a collective whole, but it's not about individual ownership at all. So I think it's really important that as we move forward, we're making sure that our partners are on board for that the cities that we work with are on board for that, and that it's publicly owned, that is open and belongs to the city, it belongs to the people, because they're the ones creating it, for sure.
Darren, do you want to add anything to this sort of
Well, I absolutely agree.
balance?
I'll step back a little bit and let's talk. I'll get to data in 1 second, but 2 points. I think it's important that we also talk about data inclusion and data literacy programs. I think it's important. If you have connectivity, say you have Wi-Fi throughout the city, or you have 5G that's coming around the corner. If you don't have a device, or you don't have a data plan, or you don't know how to use it because you're a different generation, then connectivity really is useless for you. You can't just pick up an app because you don't have a phone, or you don't have an app, or you don't know how to use the app, or the app's not accessible. So making sure that we talk about, it's not data, digital inclusion. Is what I meant to say. It's important that we focus on building technology that's accessible for everyone, and that we have our applications and our information communication technologies that are inclusive. And I think that involves the public-private people partnerships. I think it involves policy that's states specifically digital inclusion. And when people go and look for contracts, that we look at how they are digitally inclusive or they're not. Regarding data, I totally agree. I think the data should be open. It should be owned by the people. I believe in participatory democracy and technology sovereignty. And somewhere where we make sure that we know who has our data, why they need to have it, and what they're going to use it for, and maybe a data trust. I don't know. There's a lot of talk on this subject. It's very, very volatile on both sides. It's polarizing, but I do believe it needs to be owned by the people, for the people, to have real value, and also for transparency, and we can utilize it to make the world better. Not everyone who's an urban planner uses data. There's other people. I use data, like Mayan said in her presentation. It's happening every day with her application. People are using that data, like you said. If this is a big red area, hey, we know we have a hotspot. So, but I do believe in technology sovereignty, and it should be owned by the people.
So Darren has just dropped a super important concept here, the data trust. Has anyone heard of that? Data trust? It's pretty interesting. Basic concept, and you'll tell me if I got this right, is the idea of being in a smart city, they're tracking all sorts of things, like the way garbage is collected, the frequency the toilets are flushed, the ways people wake up, move around, all of that's generating the data. Who owns the data is the question, and this is central to conversations taking place in this city around sidewalk. A trust would mean it's owned by the public, right? This is a very promising and interesting way to look at that data. So how it gets used and monetized and controlled would be controlled by a group of people who don't have a financial interest in it necessarily, or by some representatives who do or don't, a mix. So we have this opportunity to collect data. The big question is what we do with it and who decides what to do with it. So a trust, like a land, a public trust, is a pretty interesting new concept that's emerging. And do you know of any cases where it's happening yet, Darren?
I don't want to say.
Okay, but it's
No, I'm joking. Actually, here in Toronto, there's going to be coming up, there's a
conversation.
Thank you. Conversation about data trusts. Look online for it. And I think it's happening in other areas. In Barcelona, in Spain, they have something similar to a data trust, but it's certainly their whole participatory democracy, their whole plan is about data being owned by the people, and they have a mechanism to scale so that there's an online mechanism that can aggregate knowledge and diversity of perspective, and it's open, and the data's open to it, and it really is helping build Barcelona from the bottom up and from the people by the people.
And of course, you know, data as it relates to accessibility, I think a lot of people could agree is an extremely positive way to use data if it can be loosened. Just, do you want to comment anything about data and stuff, or before we go to questions, Luke?
Our work is really low tech. It's really fun. It's fun. Yeah, key ingredient. It's 4 pieces of wood. We definitely keep track of where the ramps are, who we're connecting with, where the hot spots are, and what communities are taking, pun intended, the next step towards creating permanent access and legislation. So these guys are probably more well-versed than yourself on the data stuff. So
all right.
I'm having fun learning tonight about that.
Well, let's open it up to some comments. We might need to rotate one of these microphones. To you, the audience, would you like to make a comment? I should note that there are some panels around. Over here on the other side of this silver panel are some draft principles of accessibility that Sidewalk is floating, are seeking feedback on. It would be great if you commented on them in a written form over there, or if writing's not an option for you, I'm sure there would be someone there who would be willing to take down your thoughts. So, comment over there, question? Yeah.
Hi, I have sort of 2 questions maybe I can ask. So one of them is about a scenario, because I know Maya, you were talking about the data within your site, but let's talk within Smart City. So imagine that somebody is living in an apartment, a condo, and they have an oven that opens by voice command. And let's say that the apartment is at lower than market rent, so it's subsidized, and it would be very hard for them to get an apartment that was accessible downtown at anywhere near that rate. But now they're living in a place where there is elevated level of surveillance. I'm just wondering if you can sort of address the meaningful consent in that kind of environment. I'll just start with that one.
Anyone want to take that? Ryan?
I can try, but I might need some clarification on the question.
Okay. As we know, these are not people who are representatives of Sidewalk and building a community, but generally speaking, consent.
The question is around meaningful consent. So when you consent to something, meaningful consent means you're not doing it under duress. If somebody's in a position where it would be hard for them to get an accessible unit elsewhere, how do we ensure that, what could be put into place to ensure that especially in the case where there's an accessibility component, that there is actually meaningful consent to surveillance when there's all these advantages or like perks of living in a smart community that might be more accessible?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thanks for clarifying. So I've had the really interesting opportunity of reading all of the applications that went through the Smart City Challenge for Canada, because I'm acting as one of the jury members. And just for me personally, what I found very interesting were the different takes that different cities were approaching when it comes to exactly this question. And that there's a real interesting conflict or struggle there where, on one hand, whether it's a city or a service provider, is hoping to provide service to help a community, perhaps a marginalized community, perhaps people with disabilities. And the options using technology to do that need to be harmonious with the actual community. So sometimes I'll read a proposal, and it might not even be just in the Smart City Challenge, but it could be in a pitch. I was watching one yesterday where the solution for the group of people that is being proposed, there's a real disconnect between authority and consent between that group and the people designing the service and the experience. And that happens when there isn't direct feedback, when there isn't proper consultation, when there aren't people at the table whose voices can actually contribute to the design of the service or the surveillance option, let's say, as you mentioned. And I think that without that critical component, in real numbers, I asked my best friend's grandmother what they thought about this, and therefore we're good to go. In real numbers that show thoughtful feedback, thoughtful engagement with the community, there is never going, it's not going to be something, I'm hoping, that can move forward. My hope for like the future of a smart city that does recognize that is that everybody's voice is included in designing that experience, so that there aren't struggles and challenges where, for example, I want to receive service, but I don't really want to give up my privacy. It's a real challenge. I think we all experience that. It's like, I want to write an email, but I don't really want Big Brother reading every email that I write, right? So it's convenience versus privacy. It's a really good question. I don't really have the answers, but my hope is that the more engagement from a diverse group that are involved in the actual service delivery, the more comfortable we can be with what that actually looks like. So as Darren is saying, by the people, for the people, what is that?
Nothing
about us
without us.
Right.
Yeah. Great. Anyone else? A comment, a question? Yep. Hi there.
First, I'd like to comment on the whole panel. We'll start with yourself, Luke. Awesome program, great. Really grassroots. That's fabulous. And Luke, with your Smart City Library, I'm looking forward to.
Darren.
I'm so sorry.
I know that I did that to you.
I feel complimented.
Darren, with your Smart City Library, I'm looking forward to taking a closer look at that. But I focus on yourself, Mayan, with what you very modestly call an aha moment, and maybe calling on yourself and other people to have more aha moments like that, where we can, just like you did crowdfunding to get all the data points and all the data that you had collected, how can we do that for smart, for this smart city that we're looking to build? I mean, Google being a tech company, is there a plan to gather all, and this is my wheelhouse working in technology, is there a plan to gather all the best minds to have further conversations, and will you be a part of that?
Okay. If you want to take this, Mayan, great, but it's sort of a sidewalk question, right? I want to say this, okay, where's some sidewalk representatives? There's Vanessa back there. See the hands up, right? I want you to see those people. They're either going to linger, and you're going to give them an earful, you're going to tell them exactly how you think it should go. You can write it down on the boards. But to paraphrase, we're trying to engage in the broader ideas, but if you have specific things that you think should be considered, they're here and listening now too, so you can say it as a comment. But I think that, you know, the desire seems to be there, but beyond that, so just to give them you a little bit of, that's who you should go straight to. But do you want to comment about this as well?
Let me just say in general that the best smart cities or the most successful, first of all, I don't know if there's a smart city yet. And I say that because until everyone is included, until there is meaningful engagement by people with disabilities, until we can actually say that everyone means everyone, all means all, I'm not sure, like I said in my slides, a smart city is been developed. But we're getting there. And what I think is really important in some of the cities that I've helped, even in my hometown of Austin, I've worked directly with the Chief Innovation Officer and with the Chief Data Officer as well to build a smart city roadmap. And I think in that roadmap, it's reduced to writing, and you sit there and you talk about procurement. You talk about having accessible, inclusive procurement, ensuring that your contractors are building with accessibility in mind. You start talking about people-centered public policy. And you also start talking about advocates and advocates being at the table and nothing about us without us. So having something written to follow, a smart city plan, a smart city roadmap, where you bake into the plan accessibility inclusion is one promising practice. And it's going to take advocates. It's going to take all of us. Like I said in my presentation, it's up to each and every one of us to make sure that that happens. And it is happening in some areas. But without a plan, it gets willy-nilly. There's this person in leadership, and then they get voted out, and then this person and that person. You really need a smart city plan that addresses accessibility and inclusion at the forefront, putting people at the forefront of planning and development. And then, as I said before, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. There should not be a planning committee that doesn't have a voice of someone who's older, someone with lived experience with disability. If that solution involves people with disabilities or senior citizens, then you need to hear that voice. If not, you're going to make a mistake, and it's going to be a costly mistake for your taxpayers to have to remediate something that was built because it's not accessible. You know, I make a joke. It's got a joke. Maybe you guys will laugh, maybe you're not, because I'm explaining the joke. But if I'm not a gay, I'm not a lesbian, black person that uses a wheelchair, and if you want to know what one is and their opinion, ask one. Have one at the table. It's important to hear their voices. It's important to hear diversity at the table, or you're going to make big, costly mistakes.
And procurement, which you did bring up, big. If you know, all for all, nothing without us, with nothing about us without us. Let me try a rhyme for procurement.
Okay.
Procurement is part of the solution for surement. Like it
Yes.
is it. It's where the money is, right? Companies want to get the business. They want to do the work. Do the social procurement, make them do the work. It sounds like Boston is doing that, right?
Well, they are, and let me tell you, I was a little bit surprised because Austin has the vanguard of information communication technology, you know, tech providers, you know, Sony, Dell, I mean, just name the top 25. They're in a 10-mile radius of the capital of Austin. And when I bought my house in Austin, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. I didn't know if I wanted to still be in Texas. I worked a lot in Washington, D.C. But I thought for sure, because we have the vanguard of tech companies, that the city is going to be, keep it weird, going to be vibrant, going to be open. And I found out that just like everything, politics is local and accessibility is local. And quite frankly, I'm a little bit disappointed in where my city is, but we're getting there, and we're getting there with a plan. And one of the things that someone told me was, when I talked about procurement, was, oh, you know what, policies and procurements, that's just a book, it gets shelved. No, it's not just a book. It's about making sure that accessibility and inclusion are in something that someone, if it's not happening, can refer to back and say, hey, wait a minute, this is public policy. And there's a pathway to be more active and to fix it.
Yeah. Comment, question.
Okay, so
What's your name? Just hold it
am I
closer.
on here? You can hear me. Okay, perfect. So I'm an accessibility specialist in the built environment. So I work with architects and urban planners, and we do building audits, and we do drawing reviews, and we write accessibility standards for every level of government. So I'm in the room with the people making the decisions for all of this. And Nothing About Us Without Us has certainly taken hold in the last couple of years. So we're seeing a lot more public consultation right from the very beginning of the project, which is great. But I would like to introduce two really important ideas that I've been championing now around the world. And those two ideas are what we have started in the primary schools with the K through 12 programs, training the next generation, is fantastic. But it's going to take time to mature. We could see dramatic, powerful difference making if we were to go assist every design school, architecture, interior design, urban planning, industrial design, you name it, if every school included people with disabilities as people first as a foundation principle in what they taught students from day one, if we invested in a year retraining all of the faculty and all of the programs to teach people with disabilities or people first, or that people have a lifetime of changing needs and abilities, that we would not continue to graduate people who didn't know what this was and had to be taught from the beginning. That would be a huge difference. The other thing I would say about procurement is we're seeing a lot of people trying, especially in the P3 process, to do procurement better. And what's happening is the results still are not great. And they're not great because there's no accountability. Even with the AODA, this is a great legislation that when I go around the world, people are excited to hear about our AODA, they look up to it. Why are we not seeing results? Why are we not gonna hit 2025? Because there's no enforcement. So the part about procurement is the importance of procurement is you can say, we want it to be accessible, we want these higher standards, but if there's no back end, so in green design, we have something called commissioning. And what we do for commissioning in mechanical systems is they promise the mechanical systems are going to make it 80% better than the typical building. And then at the end of the process, they have an independent person come and test the mechanical equipment, and if it's not 80% better, the contractor's on the hook financially to fix it. So what we're starting to suggest, and what we've just now put into some of the procurement policies, and has worked in a couple of the universities, is the idea of commissioning for accessibility. Have an independent person audit the project at the end, and anything that didn't hit the accessibility targets is the financial responsibility of the person to fix who created the problem.
All of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That matters to people up front. They don't want to paint themselves into a corner that's expensive to fix.
Hit them where it hurts, the money, the wallet, right? Yeah.
I want to add, I want to plug just a plug. I don't get paid by them, but check out the Sunlight Foundation. The Sunlight Foundation just started an open procurement policy model, toolkit, online toolkit that can help city government, city planners with the language, with statements about open procurement. Sunlight Foundation, just check them out.
Excellent, a great asset. Why even reinvent the wheel, right? If the toolkits and the verbiage and the boilerplate is out there, great. So terrific. Comment, question in the back there.
Yeah, I was just really curious about, you guys had some great success with these tactical urbanism projects. And I guess I've always been really curious about the balance between tactical urbanism and gold standard. The OBC has really strong accessibility, but on a heritage retrofit, maybe it's going to cost $1 million to put in that elevator, and the employer, he doesn't have, unfortunately, they don't really have that need necessarily. And I guess I'm really curious about that need. I think government often wants to cover its butt and enforce the gold standard, but you often have the ability to make really great tactical wins. And I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Did you have some thoughts on that, Luke? You sort of occupy that liminal state of a stopgap, quite literally.
Yeah, that's where the StopGap ramp is. it is the gold standard when it comes to, in some cases, heritage sites, tricky heritage sites that have very little room for permanent ramp. So deployability and innovation, there's so much room for innovation in that realm. And there just aren't a whole lot of solutions out there. that exist, like really easy, turnkey, deployable solutions that are elegant and don't look like a really sad afterthought. So it's so key, Thea, yeah, to get into post-secondary schools now. Yeah, it will take some time for the younger grades to mature and start developing, getting into the workforce and putting their ideas to action. But that's a great question about heritage sites. Yeah, and I think deployability it's not great, but it gets people in the door, and information is so key. So what Mayanne is doing by providing information so that somebody isn't surprised when they get to that site and realize that, oh man, like I can't use the washroom. So they can prepare. They can anticipate that, okay, I'm gonna use a ramp that's not designed to code, and I'm going to
Drink tequila instead of beer.
Sure, or and just know they can do the research and know that, okay, 2 doors down there's a restaurant that I can go and use the washroom. So it's like bringing. We've talked a lot about the power of working collaboratively, of working with community, bringing people together, and so to crowdsource, to create bonds with business owners in community where a customer, a client might be able to go and use a washroom if they can. These are really easy, simple, low-cost, free ways to.
But it needs the backstop of enforcement, right? The real carrot and stick, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to try to, because we only got a few more minutes left to kind of move it around. Mayanne, do you have a quick comment? Because there's a few other hands up I'd like to include.
I'll be real quick.
Yep.
I have this challenge as well, and it's something that I come across a lot, especially working in this space where, specifically in government, the approach is, first we have to get it perfect, then we'll do it. The problem with that is that perfect never comes. You can always be better. And so the fear of trying something and being accountable for that and being able to own a potential mistake or a fail or a restructuring is so great that we don't move. We don't do anything. And so, I have the luxury of being in a tiny startup that gets to, ready, fire, aim, instead of, ready, aim, fire, which means we can try something, learn from it, and then make it a bit better. And so I think there's space for both. I think build the big plan, try to get to the gold standard, but while you're doing that, make sure that you're testing and trying things along the way and taking risks, because if you're not, that big plan gets bigger and bigger, and the date gets pushed out and it gets pushed out, and we're still waiting. So I think it's an interesting relationship, and I think it shouldn't be one or the other. It should be both.
All right. There's a few other people. This gentleman here, back there as well. Did someone else over here have something? All right. So let's start with the gentleman here.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to make an observation about targets that was mentioned here. A few years ago, my brother, who's a graduate architect, found himself on the planning review committee in Burnaby in BC. And the first set of plans came up, and they started looking at them and looking for the accessible condos that were there. Well, and there's a target. Now it's a certain percentage. And my brother said, I'm sorry, this doesn't make any sense. They should all be accessible. Are we going to ask somebody who's abilities are changing through their life, and they will. People get old, things happen, accidents. What are we going to do? Force them to move in the building to another building? All of these buildings should, all of these units, all of these buildings should be 100% accessible, and if we have a target, that's it. He was met by just dumbfounded stares of amazement, and people just said, okay, let's move on. So we have a little ways to go. And I wonder whether Darren's experience in Austin or around the States was similar, or whether these building codes, these design quotas or targets are a little better through your efforts.
Targets, are they baselines or dead ends?
Well, both, actually. I mean, I've gotten the same response where I'm an advocate, I'm a person with a disability, and I'm sitting on a planning committee, and I start talking about universal design. And I start talking about universal design practices with the anticipation, or no, excuse me, the expectation that people that are architects and planners know what I'm talking about. And unfortunately, I found out that they didn't. So I thought, okay, you know what? The advocate in me wants to get passionate, but the good ambassador in me is going to educate. So I take the time, and it's going to take time. It's systemic change, and systemic change takes time. But if there's an opportunity for me to be a good ally for my community, for myself, and for everyone, I'm going to take it. So I made sure to contact that representative and talk to them about universal design and provide resources. There's been other areas where I take a deep breath, like, my God, thank God, you know about accessibility, you know about inclusion. I recently met Thea online through social media, and I feel like I couldn't stop talking to her because it was like an open, refreshed voice who gets accessibility and inclusion, that gets the reason why we need to have affordable, available public transit and accessible housing. And, you know, America does have the ADA, and it's 25 years old. But every day, I can tell you, there's an accessibility problem in every city, even today. But what Maya said is really important, and I think President Obama recently said it just recently, that better is good. Innovation is iterative. How do you say that word?
Yeah.
I never get it right. How it's supposed to be meant. Innovation is iterative.
Iterative.
Thank
You got
you.
it.
And like I said in my presentation, we need to be more agile and try things out. And better is good. Better is good.
All right, let's hold it there. Let's get a couple more comments. Yep, at the back.
It actually dovetails really well off of a couple of comments that several of you have made, is around the startup space. So it is called Sidewalk Labs. There will presumably be experiments that happen. There will be startups. There are startups around Toronto that are operating out of like hackathons and incubators and such. How do we get the early and often and like increasing the accessibility, inclusion, and the co-design space into the sort of really lean startup model?
You know, I'm mindful that we actually have 4 minutes left. If you have a quick answer, great, but we could also just take this as advice. Sidewalk is here listening, and they need to hear that that's what you think would work. I mean, so if there's something you want to quickly say, there's another person who wants to make a comment.
I want to say one sentence, and that is that all living labs needs to be set in real-life contextual surroundings, not some technical, perfect lab where everything is going to be designed, but it needs to have people with disabilities, older people at the table. It needs to be in real-life context.
And Marianne so eloquently said, you can fire, aim, and think in whatever order within a startup. You can have a bit of fun with it, right? Okay. Yes, this woman here.
Hi, back on housing. I'm really glad to hear your comments. The Older Women's Network is working on getting the building code changed. We want the Ontario Building Code and the Federal Building Code to require that all housing that has any government funding, in the federal sense, the funding, but all housing, period, have to be universal design. Every new residential building should be totally universal design. And if you're talking about a house, the main floor at least can be universal design. The building code now doesn't require that any housing be livably accessible. It only requires that 15% of the units in a multi-residential building be visitable. It means you can come in and have a cup of coffee and pee. That's it. So you can't live there. The AODA doesn't even mention housing, and it has severe limitations on which businesses have to comply. So we're nowhere near an accessible Ontario. It's a step in the right direction.
Yes.
But if you can't find a place to live, how are you going to take advantage of all these other benefits? I know someone who had to quit her job and leave Toronto because she could not find an accessible apartment. She's now on disability. Where's the benefit in that for anybody?
Well, this is the kind of inspired, blue sky leadership it takes, right? It sounds crazy. Well, we couldn't possibly do a universal design, but that's how change happens. People with ambitions and dreams go after it, so good on you for being brave. Now, okay, whoa, good news story. Toronto City Council voted to support that. Yahoo. Let's not go down that rabbit hole, however. So, last word. A quick one sentence. A lot of these people here are clearly champions and access allies, if not, struggling on a day-to-day level to make their environments more accessible. How do we avoid burnout? How do you keep going, knowing that it's quite an uphill battle at times? Just a kind of a pro tip from the front lines, starting with Darren.
I don't think you can avoid burnout. I think burnout is part of the process. I think that you burn out, but you stand up again, and you get up again, and you advocate. And in America, sometimes people say, people within the independent living movement say, okay, we're going to communicate, we're going to educate, then we're going to communicate, and we're going to educate again, and if that doesn't work, we're going to litigate. So, advocacy, getting up and doing it again, that's how you make change. We can't stop. Never stop advocating. You need to make the world better by speaking your truth.
Awesome. I'm going to let the woman speak last. Go, Luke.
Great question. Well, I'm really big on balance. And I'm really big on giving other people the opportunity to share and take the mic, take the stand, and talk about the importance of a barrier-free society. So I'm just really empowered and passionate about passing the torch to other people so that I avoid burnout. I want balance in my life. It's so key to, go out hard, give it your best, but then take time to rest and give other people the stage. Yep.
All right, bring us home, Maya.
Okay. So first, I just want to say thanks to Sidewalk Labs for hosting this really fantastic conversation and inviting us to share our thoughts. I think that if I was to leave one piece of advice, it would just be that if you see an opportunity to do something, a lot of times people go, oh, well, somebody's probably thought of that, or I'm sure the city's dealing with it, or the federal government is going to figure it out. Good luck. I think every person here has an opportunity to contribute somehow, whether it's adding a pin on Access Now, or volunteering with StopGap, or sharing information with Darren that can be shared on Smart Cities Library, or whatever. There's always opportunities to contribute and become an ally, an advocate, a change maker when it comes to creating more inclusive cities. And it just takes involvement. As Luke's saying, it takes people to roll up their sleeves and say, that garbage can is in the way. If somebody passes on the sidewalk, they're going to get stuck. I'm going to move it. Super simple idea, right? Just little things. Every day, if you do one thing, we're probably contributing to a more accessible, inclusive space.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much, Darren, Mayan, and Luke. Thank you for coming. Hope to see you back here again. Bye-bye.